Alright, just a really quick disclaimer before we get into the subject of this video. If in watching this video you find yourself getting emotional, a little bit upset, or ready to shut the video off, or really quick to want to comment and say stuff in the comments, then this video is actually for you. It's not for you to shut off. And the reason why I say this is because according to the Bible in James, we're supposed to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. And Jesus explained to me that one of the biggest issues of why people are having issues in receiving correction or giving correction is because they are actually violating the scripture. They're very quick to speak and become emotional and become angry. It's not the words that are spoken to us that give us justification to be angry. At least not according to James. We are supposed to be slow to speak and slow to anger and listen. So what we should be doing if we find that quick emotions are rising on us and we feel like we really need to say something, we should be counting this as temptation. We should pause for a moment, and this is what I practice. I actually do practice this. I'm speaking from experience. What we should be doing is pausing, pulling back for a moment. We should be going back either into prayer or just letting emotions settle and then coming back to the situation with a sober mind so we can listen to what's being said and then effectively come to a conclusion with a sober mind without all the extra emotional stuff, and then be able to process what's being said and then come to a logical and a truthful conclusion through Jesus. Letting the emotions of anger dictate how we live, for example, what videos we watch and don't watch and what information we receive or don't receive, is not godly. It's not how Jesus operated, so it's not actually how we're supposed to operate. Technically, if we do operate like this and allowing ourselves to operate on these emotions or feelings or impulses of being quick to speak or quick to anger, we are technically in sin, and that behavior does lead to more sin. This is why I'm taking the time to just give this note and a disclaimer that technically it's not the words on this video that is leading you to be angry. It's technically temptation. And it's not just this video, it's also my other videos, but especially this video. And it's behaviors just like this that have caused being able to give good correction and being able to receive correction to become a mystery in this world. And that, again, is why I'm giving this disclaimer. It's not only for this video, but I'm especially giving it for this video so that no one misses out on anything because Satan decides to invoke anger in them. I pray this video will be a blessing to someone. Alright, in the last video, I explained how the testimony of Jesus is correction. It's the correction that leads us out of sin. It's the correction that leads us into the truth. I also ended that video off explaining that the refusal of correction, rejecting the correction that leads us out of sin, is technically what sends people to hell. Now, I'm just going to validate that statement to just make sure that it's understood that it is technically sin that causes us to be in a state where we are guilty, where we deserve hell. But because Jesus has come and God's expressed his love in the fact that while we were yet sinners, he sent Jesus to die for us, we now have a way out of hell through Jesus Christ. And that way out is by coming to him and submitting to him, trusting in him, and him being Lord over our lives and leading us. So if we reject Jesus' correction, if we reject the testimony of the Holy Spirit, then ultimately, after coming to him like this, what we're doing is basically lining ourselves up to be still ending having to go to hell. Why? Because we're continuing in the sins that he's corrected and that he's pointing and saying, hey, listen, this needs to stop and this is how you do so. And just to quickly throw in there, I'm talking about people rebelling and choosing not to obey. I'm not talking about those who are trying and just struggling and learning. Just making sure that that's clear so no one gets condemned. Many Christians, sadly, they know certain things are wrong and they need to stop, but Satan is working really hard so they don't receive the correction from Jesus. There's some genuine people out there that when they hear the correction, they jump on it. They're excited. However, there's some people out there that are not as excited. And I'll explain why they're not excited close to the end of this video. One other note about people rejecting correction and ending up in hell. There's corrections that people reject that has absolutely nothing to do with salvation, according to the Bible. Okay? There are corrections that people will get from other brothers and sisters, or even from the Holy Spirit, and they reject it because when they read the Bible and according to their understanding, they don't need to do it. Now, on surface value, let's say you don't actually apply the correction. that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up in hell because you didn't do what that correction was. And again, I'm talking about a correction that doesn't look like it's sin right away. What Jesus showed me about this is that people who practice not receiving correction and coming back to him and really breaking it down, seeking the truth, even if they think they're right, if they continue in error and they're not following him, but they think they're following him, when corrections come that they don't deem to be important or they think they're already justified and they're already in the right standing, when those corrections come, and even though they're not salvation impacting, if they don't apply the correction, it doesn't necessarily mean that that will send them to hell. Jesus explained to me that the attitude that they have can send them to hell. So it's not so much that you didn't do this, so now you're going to hell. It's more so that you didn't do this because of this attitude that you have and this practice and the way of thinking that you have, and you also applied this way of thinking to this area, and this area. In these areas, these are salvation impacting and they can send you to hell. So even if the initial correction they got, let's say if it was false, even in practicing handling false correction that way, can lead someone to practice doing that with the true correction, and then they can find themselves in problems. And that's just one scenario. There's also the scenario where you could be getting truthful correction, and because they practice rejecting correction in this way, which most people do practice, they end up justifying themselves by corrupting other things under the same subject. And I'm going to give you an example with this one. For example, this one's going to rub some people the wrong way, I already know, because this is a sensitive subject, which I'm going to be making a video on in the future. We'll use head coverings as an example with women. This happens to be a pretty sensitive subject with a number of women out there. Now I'm just going to paint a scenario here where there's a woman who doesn't cover her head. A woman who does cover her head corrects the other one and says, hey, listen, according to the Bible, we're supposed to cover our heads. Paul said that a woman should cover her head when she's praying and prophesying. If a woman does not cover her head, then she should shave her hair. If it's a shame to shave her hair, then she should cover her head. The glory of a woman is her hair. The glory of man is the woman. The glory of God is man. With a woman covering her head, she's covering her glory, she's covering her hair, and that also covers the glory of man, so God is glorified. This correction is given. Now, rather than the person who doesn't cover their head going back to Jesus and saying, these are interesting points, I'm not invested, I don't believe it, I don't even agree with you, but let me just still go back and double check because I'm a truth seeker. Instead of doing this, they hold their position because they believe they already have the truth and they don't need to be corrected and they're right. Here's where things go really bad. I've literally seen where people practice doing this, and to justify themselves, they lie against the truth and then start saying, well, you know what? We don't have to cover our heads because we're only supposed to follow Jesus. We don't have to follow Paul. And I'm not even going to be touching that one on this video, not in detail. But I will tell you this much. Once you get rid of Paul, once you say we don't need to follow Paul, Paul said to leave those people ignorant. He said, if anyone considers themselves spiritual, they must acknowledge that the words he spoke are commandments from the Lord Jesus. That means Paul's words are also commandments from Jesus Christ. And Jesus set up Paul to be the apostle over the nations. He was the apostle that brought the gospel to the Gentiles. Whole heap of Christians today talking about how they're Gentiles, and they don't believe he's a legit apostle, or at least he's not an authoritative apostle, or we don't actually have to obey what he says, when he was the chosen vessel to bring the gospel to the Gentiles, to teach them. Anyway, I'm gonna rest that one there. The point that I'm trying to make here is, do you notice how resisting correction now leads into a corruption that can lead to some very, very big problems in the future? This is what I'm talking about. And this is just one thing. I've noticed that with women not covering their heads, they're also open to false angels of light. And Paul also mentioned about covering the head and the angels and whatnot. I've noticed that women who oftentimes don't cover their head, they end up falling into some serious Jezebel issues, and they don't actually deal with it. They actually just run with it. Now, I'm not trying to turn this into a head covering video. I'm just trying to explain this as an example of, you notice how rejecting one correction can lead into a spiral into a whole lot of other corruption. And this is the same across the board. I've seen it with divorce and remarriage. I've seen people literally leave the faith over that subject. It's crazy. Now, I'm not trying to sit here and say if you're not wearing a head covering, you're on your way to hell. That's not what I'm trying to say. In fact, that's not even close to the point. The point I'm trying to make is the attitude of not receiving correction on something as, I would say, obvious and as simple as that can lead into further corruption that could send you to hell. leave you open to get attacked by demons that can then cause you to be in other errors that could send you to hell. And also, that attitude in itself is from a spirit that is trying to send you to hell. Not receiving correction properly is actually from a spirit. It is from an entity that is rejecting truth, rejecting correction. The Bible calls these spirits fools. They call it stupid. And that's why it's all about receiving correction properly, as well as giving correction, which I'm going to be getting into in a moment. But it really is about receiving correction properly, because if we can receive correction, we're going to come out of whatever sins, and we're going to follow Jesus. But if we're not receiving correction, we can easily line ourselves up to end up in hell. I'm literally a witness of seeing this happen with people. They were unable to receive correction on one matter, and they started going wayward over time in a whole lot of other matters, and got completely corrupted. And they don't realize. Jesus said, anyone who follows him will not abide in darkness. It's in the scriptures. Jesus told me personally, if anyone receives correction from someone, and when I say receive correction, I mean if anyone has been given correction from someone, and they continue in error, they're not following him. And the reason why it works like this is because we're supposed to be taking our corrections that we get and going to Jesus and being led by him in how to handle the correction. Even if you think you're right, even if you've already gone back to Jesus before, we're supposed to go back to him and be led by him regarding what's been presented to us today. So I'm going to end this point here, and I'm going to move on to the main subjects of this video, which are obviously related to this, and it's how to properly give and receive correction. Because as you can tell with what I just said here, this is a very, very important subject. And yeah, the other reason why I'm going to be going through this, the other reason why this video is being produced and put out here, is because what I'm about to explain, the whole ins and outs of giving and receiving correction effectively and properly, is a mystery. Sadly, it seems like there's a lot of people that just do not know this, and I don't believe it's supposed to be a mystery. So I'm going to be going through some pretty big details regarding giving and receiving. Now, I've already talked a lot about the receiving. There's a few videos. Even the last one I talked a little bit more about it. There's the Son of God Pride video as well in the How to Stop Sinning Through Grace playlist. This is something I've brought up quite a bit. Even in the Golden Calves playlist, I'm pretty sure I covered it with the faith being... pride being the faith of the religion of Christianity and so on. In this video, what's going to be a little bit more unique is I'm going to be speaking more about giving correction. And the reason why is because there's a lot of people out there that don't know how to give correction. And they're still giving it. It's not that they're not giving the correction. They're giving the correction and they don't know how to effectively do it. And it's very important that if we're going to be correcting people, that we correct them effectively and appropriately. Otherwise, we could damage people or cause problems or even cause condemnation upon ourselves. And that's not mentioning that certain people's corrections, their false ones, can cause people to sin, which is even worse. So the first thing I'm going to go into here is the giving of correction. Now, in my experience, and even in the more recent days, I have gotten some correction from people, and they've done a really good job in pointing me into the direction of truth with certain things. I've also received some pretty bad correction from people. Now, I'm not trying to put anyone on blast. It's just, it really is something worth talking about giving people correction. And it's not just me. Like, I know a lot of people who've been suffering from people trying to correct them, and they're not actually correcting them. They're not actually even helping them. They throw their correction out there, if they're questioned on it, and then they get mad and then leave. So, what should we not do when we are giving people correction? Well, for starters, telling someone you're in error, or telling them you're wrong, or telling them this is false, or even go as far as saying that's not in the Bible. These statements, generally speaking, are not actually correction in themselves. That last one is a little bit closer to correction, but it's not exactly correction. The rest of them technically are straight up accusations. There's a very big difference between correcting someone and accusing them of needing correction. Telling someone that they're in error is just simply accusing the person of needing correction. That's not actually correcting someone. And here's the worst part about this. The act of accusing someone and saying that you are in need of correction because you're wrong, you're in error, this is false, Satan does that too. It's no different. Satan accuses people all the time. That's what condemnation is. It's you've sinned, you're in error, you're wrong, you're blah blah blah. It's pretty much the same words. Now they could be said in a different way, they could be said in a kind manner, but the point is, by definition here, that's technically not the correction that one should be giving to help someone. It's the beginning, for sure. Like, you do have to point out, hey, this is error. But stopping there and that alone is simply an accusation that the person is in need of correction. And I'm going to point something out here with the Bible concerning this. In James said that if we see a brother who's naked or they're hungry and we send them off and say, let all be well with you, and just, let's say, pray for them, our faith is dead. So how much more when you see someone naked and you're accusing them of being spiritually naked or hungry, and you just point out, hey, you're naked and you're hungry, and then you send them off and tell them to go and pray about it. And you claim you have the truth. You're essentially doing the same thing. Your faith is dead. And even worse, John spoke about a similar situation where if we have this world's means of life and we shut up our bowels of compassion to our brother who's in need, then where's the love of God in us? And in some scriptures or some verses before that, he actually compares this kind of behavior to Cain. So how much more if someone is lacking the spiritual life of truth? And you point it out and say, hey, listen, you're lacking the truth. But then you don't actually explain anything further. You don't actually give them the wisdom. You don't actually give them the actual truth. You just point out they're missing it, and then you send them off and say, well, you got to pray about it. Or I'm not correcting you, that's not my job. It's essentially like Cain when he said, I'm not my brother's keeper. That's essentially what the person's saying. So do keep this in mind that if we do feel the need to point out error to someone, it immediately becomes our responsibility, especially if the person wants it. If they're saying, okay, well, what's the problem? It is our responsibility to give the truth and the correction. We cannot just pass it off and give it to Jesus. Paul said that he did not shun giving the entire whole counsel of God. Okay? And in Ezekiel, God said straight to that guy, I know this is Old Testament, but in the New Testament we see similar with what Paul said about his hands being clean of the blood of all men because he gave the whole counsel of God. In Ezekiel, if you're a watchman and you see error and you don't actually point it out and correct to lead that person out of their sin, the blood's on your hands. So if you see a brother or a sister and you correct them, and I'm putting this in quotes, and just say you're in error, but you don't actually lead them into the truth, you don't explain what the error is, then you're leaving them hungry, you're leaving them naked, you're withholding the spiritual life of truth, and technically, their blood is on your hands if they're in sin. And they're asking you for the truth you're claiming that they need that you have. Because the truth doesn't belong to us. It belongs to Jesus, and we're supposed to freely give it. Sending them to Jesus is sadly a cop-out, and the Bible doesn't actually instruct us to handle our brethren in this way, and telling them they're in error and go to Jesus. We're supposed to give them something. At least, the very least, give them what we have. So, how do we give people correction effectively and properly then? Well, essentially, after pointing out to someone, hey, listen, you're in error, and listen, this doesn't have to be a formula, by the way. You don't have to do this first and do that first. There's different ways. I mean, you can give the correction first and then say, hey, listen, this is why you're in error, right? When you're giving someone correction, what you're doing is you're building a bridge between the error that they're in and where the truth is, and you're giving an explanation. You're giving wisdom. You're giving understanding. You're giving them the substance behind the accusation of, or the judgment, or the conclusion, this is wrong. Correction is supposed to give someone some form of illumination, some form of understanding that they can take back to Jesus. Even if they don't accept it and believe it right away, at least they can accept it to put into Jesus' hands, and you give them something to work with. If you just simply say, you're wrong, you're not really giving the person much to work with. And what's even worse is when people are giving correction to someone else's correction. What I mean by this is, let's say you correct me in something, and then I don't think that what you said is correct. If I turn around and say, you're wrong, and I don't actually explain why you're wrong, I'm not actually correcting you. I'm just accusing you of being wrong, and I haven't given you anything more to work with. And I'm pretty sure many of us have been in these kinds of scenarios where we've been in debates or been in discussions, and we've put out a point, and then someone just says that you're wrong. And they don't actually explain why. Then you have to ask them, well, why am I wrong? And then they just send you to go to Jesus. Well, that doesn't really work because it's you that's making the judgment saying that the person's wrong, so you should be explaining yourself. It's not Jesus who said this person was wrong. Now, if Jesus did tell you, hey, this person's wrong, tell them that they're wrong, Jesus will give you wisdom and understanding to share with the person so that they can have something to work with. So that's a very basic rundown on what one should do in giving someone correction effectively. I'm going to point out something else that should not be done. You know, when two people are in a discussion or even a debate or whatever, and they're giving their points back and forth and they're having trouble coming to an agreement. And whether this is going smooth or not, whether this debate is actually doing very well or if the points are all over the place, either way, you know how this ends up happening, and then finally they just come to the conclusion where they say, well, let's agree to disagree. You all can go back and ask Jesus about this. I'm telling you right now that he already showed me, like he showed me this, that that's not his spirit. He does not lead us to agree to disagree. He leads us to come to him to receive the truth, so we both will come back to each other in unity with an answer from him. And he's not about division. Those who state we'll agree to disagree are pretty much hugging what they want to believe and saying, you can believe what you want to believe, I'll believe what I want to believe, we can both be on two separate areas, and we'll just stay at peace. That's cool, you're keeping the peace, but that's not actually bringing unity into the body of Christ. That's not actually the spirit of Jesus, that's the spirit of division. And that peace is superficial because when it comes to that subject, there still isn't any peace. If that subject comes up again, it's still a war. So the peace is essentially a lie. It's hypocrisy. It's a mask. And it's also fear of conflict. And this also ties into, again, the root of the problem here, which is fear. And I'm going to be coming back to that in a moment. But the point is, agreeing to disagree is not a Christian option. That's not an option between two children of God who are trying to seek the truth, who want the truth. The truth can't be two opposing ends. So we should be going back to Jesus and finding out what the truth is so we can all be in unity. Agreeing to disagree is basically agreeing that one or both parties can stay in darkness. And that's not love. It's a demonic teaching. The Bible doesn't teach it, and it doesn't help anyone. It's satanic. Again, the answer is, as in what we should be doing, is both parties or whoever is involved in the discussion or argument, who's been giving the correction and or receiving the correction, should be going back to Jesus to find out what the truth is. So all can agree in Jesus, in the truth. But most people don't want to do that. Now, going back to the main subject of people who think they're giving correction when they're not actually giving true correction, there are many Christians who do not understand this. And it's actually really, really scary, guys. It's very scary how many Christians are giving corrections and they're not actually pulling people out the fire. They're not giving people wisdom. And they're not giving people the whole counsel of God. It's written in the scriptures. Paul said that he was clean of the blood of all men because he did not withhold, he did not shun giving the whole counsel of God. And there's people who are trying to give people correction, who are telling people they're wrong, and they're not giving them the whole counsel. And even worse, when they explain why the person's wrong, they're testifying of themselves. They're saying, well, in my testimony, I studied under Jesus, I learned from Jesus myself for X amount of years, or I had this experience and this experience. And cool. I'm not even saying that your experiences aren't even worth anything. I am saying that if you say that you've been learning from Jesus for X amount of years, that is worth nothing. That doesn't actually prove that what you are reciting is actually from Jesus. But your experiences might be worth something, but you're going to have to explain why the other person is wrong. Explaining why you're right doesn't always end up helping someone understand their error. If I say we can't stop sinning, and you say to me, no, we can stop sinning, it's possible, and I say, no, you're wrong, because I've tried and I failed. Well, that doesn't mean that the other person's wrong. That's not evidence, that's not proof. Now, if you say we can stop sinning, I say we can't stop sinning, And then you say to me, no, you're incorrect, because I have a witness. I actually have stopped sinning. This is how. Jesus showed me this. Jesus showed me this. Jesus showed me this. I overcame this. I learned how to do this and this. I learned through temptation. I need to do this and this. Jesus showed me all the ins and outs. And here's all the scriptures why. Then you explain, you should do this, this, this. You said in your testimony it was this, but you should have done this because this is this. If you do this way, the results you should see is this. That right there is correction, guys. Why? Because that's giving an explicit witness of why what you're saying is correct, and you're explaining to them what they should have done instead according to their experience. And you're backing it up with the scriptures. And even if your correction doesn't actually apply to the person, even if it was faulty or it doesn't line up with the person's experience or it doesn't actually help them, at least you've given them something to work with. You've given them some form of substance that they can actually understand and click what you're saying together with why you're saying what they're saying doesn't make any sense. It would then just be up to them to explain to you, hold on, your correction doesn't make any sense here because this is actually the situation with me. This all comes down to understanding each other and properly, effectively speaking on each other's points that are being presented with understanding. Demonstrating that you understand what they're saying and effectively responding to the point. There are a lot of Christians who are not doing this and acting like they are. And then they get upset when it gets pointed out that they're not actually giving correction. They're giving straw man arguments, they're arguing about points that were not actually made, they're coming up with other points and arguing them, they're changing the subjects, or they're giving nothing at all. They don't give anything. They just send you off to Jesus. You know? It's a royal mess. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this. The point I'm trying to make here with the whole giving correction thing is just simply telling someone you're in error or you're wrong is not correction. And when you're giving correction, you should be giving information, understanding, wisdom that directly explains why the other person is incorrect with their position. Giving examples and drawing out reasons that do not actually refute what the person is saying. It doesn't show why they're in error. It doesn't show why what you're saying is true in comparison to what the person's saying is error. That's not actually correction. There's two major things you need to do in order to give good correction. The first one is you actually have to understand what the person is saying. A lot of times people are correcting people and they don't even understand what the person's saying. And in some cases they just simply think they understand what the person's saying. In other cases they don't actually care about understanding what the person is saying. This is a prime example of people who are not being quick to listen and are being very quick to speak. They're oftentimes simply thinking about what's in their own head and the beliefs that they have. And the reason why they're like this is because their motive is actually defending their own beliefs. Their motive is not looking for the truth to make sure that both themselves and the one challenging them are in the truth and have accurate information. They're not allowing the Holy Spirit to guide both of them into truth. And the reason why they do this is because they already believe they understand, because they're treating their information as if it is the truth, Jesus Christ, which is what I called golden calves in some previous videos. And as for the second important thing, in order to effectively give correction to anyone, you really do have to go back to Jesus first. This is what it comes down to. In order for you to get truth, wisdom, understanding, in order for you to discern the errors in someone's message or information, you have to go to Jesus and have him break it down for you. You have to have him show you this is wrong because of this is the wisdom behind here, this is how this works. And Jesus, especially in the conversations we're talking about here, which is basically doctrine and Jesus and whatnot, Jesus will use the scriptures. That's what the scriptures are for. That's what it says in Timothy. That they're for rebuke, correction, instruction, and in righteousness and so on. But in order to effectively give someone proper correction, we shouldn't be giving it from within ourselves, as in, well, I think this, so you're wrong. Well, I studied that, so you're wrong. That's absolutely crazy. You're not right because you studied someone else's webpage or YouTube channel or something. In a way, you could be charged with stealing prophecies and stealing words from another teacher or from another prophet. What we should be doing is be going to Jesus, receiving the truth, receiving wisdom, receiving correction, And then we're sharing that with the other person and giving them the whole counsel of God. Not our counsel, but the counsel of God. When we truly go back to Jesus and receive the truth, and we take what the person said to us back to Jesus and have him go through it with us, then we can effectively give correction. And this is one of the biggest reasons why people are not giving proper correction. They're not actually going back to Jesus about what was said to them. Another really big reason why people do not give proper correction, and they're not trying to give correction to help the other person, is because they're giving correction to defend themselves, because if they're wrong, it's going to cost them something. They have selfish motives and selfish ambition that's backing what they believe to be the truth. So if they are wrong, this is not a matter of them wanting the truth. It's a matter of them wanting to be justified in the information they already have because they don't want to lose something. This is exactly what James was talking about when he talked about wisdom that does not come from above. James said, if we have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in our heart, do not boast and do not lie against the truth. And this is exactly what people do when they're giving corrections to defend themselves. If the truth comes, they will lie against the truth because of their selfishness. James said, this wisdom is not that which comes from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition are, there is confusion in every evil deed. And you can read the rest of the context to see the wisdom from above. The point is, this is a common manifestation with people who are trying to correct people because they're defending themselves, and they're defending the things that they believe in. They're not correcting people because they actually desire to be in the truth and want the other person to be in the truth and want to agree in the truth of Jesus together. There's a very, very distinct difference. And oftentimes, when someone gives information that's faulty and you point it out and expose that there's confusion, usually if they still love their information, they'll hug it and run, or just become stubborn on their stance, which the Bible calls idolatry. This is the other big reason, coupled with the fact that these same people are not going back to Jesus to receive proper wisdom to give someone in correction. And I'm telling you guys, Jesus showed me that this is a big problem with Christians today. A lot of people are running on pride. They're confident in the information they have, and they're just sharing it, correcting people, and they're not even aware that the corrections that they're sharing are error. We really should be going back to Jesus with what people say to us, and if we are going to correct them, we should be receiving from Jesus the wisdom of not just what to correct them with, also how, and at times it's also when. Some people don't need correction in doctrine even though their doctrine is wrong. Sometimes people have the wrong doctrine because they have a wound that needs healing. And if that wound gets healing, they'll immediately testify, you know what, I don't even have to hold on to this, I don't even believe this anymore. So it's not even about being right here, guys. It's not about being right. It's about what does this other person need? What's the actual correction they need? And sometimes that correction isn't even in the doctrine. The correction might be on a mindset that they have because they're wounded. So it's very important that if you're going to be giving anyone correction, that we should be going back to Jesus, giving them the truth, and also working according to how Jesus leads us with them. And I'm not going to sit here and say I've absolutely mastered this. It is something I have been practicing, and I'm still perfecting it. And I have definitely seen fruit out of it. But I've also seen some pretty serious horror stories out there in the internet with other believers. Now, the other subject I'm going to cover more lightly, because I've already covered this in a few videos, is receiving correction. Just like the giving correction, ultimately, when someone is giving you correction and telling you, hey, listen, this is wrong, or hey, listen, you should go check this out, or whatever the case is, you're wrong, you're in error, this is false, someone drops all of that on you, then you should be taking it from them. And listen, if they didn't give you the proper correction, if they just accused you, by all means, ask them for the correction. I highly recommend that if anyone comes to you and says you're wrong, that that's not the case, ask them for the correction. Say, okay, well, what's the deal? And it's not to show up the person. The reason why it makes sense to ask them this is for two reasons. One, it actually reminds them of the responsibility they have in actually explaining their position. Two, it allows you to receive the full information, or the whole counsel of God if it is truthful information, or their whole understanding, so you can take it back to Jesus effectively and have it broken down completely. And if it is true, you get the whole package. If it is not true, Jesus can then give you answers to actually effectively correct their full position. And maybe they may change their mind and repent. But the point is, when correction's coming your way, you should be taking it in. Even if you know you're right, you should receive it and say, you know what, let's both go back to Jesus about it. Because both people should be going back to Jesus. If one person's giving correction and it's not received, then the person giving a correction and the person who received the correction, both of them should be going back to Jesus regarding this whole matter. Because now there's a conflict. This is a very simple thing to do, but yet it seems very hard for people to effectively do this. The reason why this has become so hard is because a lot of people are in fear. They're afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being deceived. They're afraid of other people teaching them. They're in so many various fears, especially those who have left church. Those who've been scarred by pastors, scarred by church, scarred by people who've used the Bible to beat them and whip them. People are really damaged in this world right now. And yeah, a lot of it is sadly the spirit of religion's fault operating within people. This is the main reason why a lot of people don't want to receive correction from people. They hug and hold on to what they already believe to be true that gives them comfort. There's a saying that people don't really want the truth. They just want to be reassured that the things that they already believe is true. They just want people to consistently reassure them, yeah, that's true, I agree with you, I agree with you. And that's how we end up with cutting people off that are different, that have different views. That's how we end up blocking people. That's how we end up slandering people. That's how we end up shunning people away. Rather than correcting them and giving them the truth that we say that we have, and rather than being willing to be challenged to say, hey, you know what, maybe this may not be true. Maybe I might need healing in an area. Rather than humbling ourselves, people run and cut people off because they're in fear. That doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the other person. People who behave like this, they don't love people. They don't love like how Jesus loves. If we have to agree on everything, or if I have to agree with you in order to be friends, stay in contact, or even still be able to chit-chat here and there, then we don't actually love each other. We love ourselves, and we love the information that we hold to be true. And that's idolatry. We're supposed to love Jesus, and Jesus does not treat people like this. Everyone in this world has some form of error somewhere, and all of us at some point have been stubborn with Jesus, and he's still there. He hasn't cut us off. He hasn't deleted us off Facebook. He hasn't unsubscribed from our YouTube. He hasn't unsubscribed from our life. But this is what Christians are practicing right now. If someone corrects them and they don't agree, see ya. They're not receiving it. If they give correction and the person doesn't receive it properly, guess what? See ya. It's the other way around as well. Sadly, we live in a world where many people, especially Christians, are living in selfish mindsets. And it's crazy because even receiving correction, a lot of people look at it for only them. And that's part of the reason why they're ready to reject it when it comes. When you're going to Jesus and you're taking that correction in and you're putting it before Jesus, it's not just for you. When you're taking that correction in and you're going to Jesus, it's also for the sake of the other person, especially if they're in error. And if you believe they're in error, you should be excited to go back to Jesus to receive the truth regarding what they've said to you so that you can present it to them. And especially if you know that what they're saying is not true. If someone is saying something to you that's not true and you're deleting them, deleting their comments, blocking them, and all this other stuff, unsubscribing, that's not the Jesus way of handling anything. That's not how you do that. That's not how you handle it. That's not how you correct them. That's not how you save someone. You're running from them. Why? Because you're afraid that they might be right. Jesus did not operate like this. But people are running around treating these behaviors as if it's righteous. I don't have time to argue with this, blah, 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 blah. Guys, I'm going to share something with you. When I first started talking online, whether you want to call it preaching, teaching, or whatever, Jesus instructed me not to delete people's comments. I think I started off doing that, maybe, and Jesus instructed me not to do so. Jesus also instructed me not to delete or block people. And I'm speaking within the context of debates, discussions, and corrections here. There are posts I would delete. For example, people have been posting links of pornography and stuff like that, even on my channel. And obviously those I would be getting rid of. The context here is correcting people or receiving correction, not to delete those. He explained that he doesn't do it. And he told me that if I truly have the truth, I have nothing to be afraid of. Just put it out there and let it sit. If I don't have the truth, and I'm sharing error with people, I have nothing to be afraid of, because when I put it out there and I'm consistently going back to him about it, it's going to be refined and I will find the truth. So if people truly are truth seekers and truth lovers, as they say they are, they're going to be given the patience, the long-suffering, the forbearance, the gentleness, the kindness. They'll be given the sternness as well, and they're going to be given the energy and the power to work with people who they know are in error. And again, throwing some context in here, I'm not sitting here saying sit there and engage in foolish, vain arguments and repetitiveness. I'm still a advocate and a follower of what Paul said in Titus regarding avoiding foolish arguments. But it's still right to give the full counsel at least once or even twice before backing out of a discussion. And again, I'm not saying that you should delete the discussion, but if you back out and say, listen, I've shared what I needed to share, we can go back and pray about it. Or if the person doesn't want to, you back out and say, okay, we'll end this here. At least give them everything that they're supposed to receive and then back out. And again, this isn't just for you. And especially online, this can be for other people who are reading as well. The point is, we shouldn't be ending discussions because we're tired or we don't have the energy to do it or so on, so on, and so on, and so on. We should be ending discussions because we've given everything that we needed to give, and it's slowly becoming foolish. Jesus gives us the strength to accomplish what's necessary and what's needed, and a lot of Christians do not demonstrate this. I can sit here and go through things for a very long time with people because it's not my own strength anymore. It's the strength that I get from the truth. If you find that you're too tired and drained to deal with one person on a subject, you don't have time for them, because their points are just stupid, chances are you're in error. You don't have the truth. There's a very, very, very good chance that you don't have the truth. And you may not love the truth like you think, because when you love the truth, you're able to receive correction from anyone, go to Jesus, and then you're able to either say, hey, you know what? You were right. I was wrong. Jesus did show me this. Or you could say, listen, I went back to Jesus and he showed me this is right, this is right, this is right, this is right. But he showed me this was error on your part. Or you can go back and say, hey, listen, everything you said here was incorrect. This is very important. Like, I can't stress this anymore, guys. Like, I really cannot stress how important it is to be able to effectively receive correction and effectively give it. John, I already have other videos. I don't want to be repeating myself. I'm just going to quickly say, John identified Antichrist as people who don't listen to the truth. They don't listen to those who are bearing the truth. There's so many Christians right now that are not listening to the truth. They're all Antichrists, according to John. This is some scary stuff. Everyone really needs to go back and reevaluate themselves when it comes to this giving and receiving correction thing. I'm going to end this video here because I could go on for a while on this. My next video is going to be on fear. It's going to be an in-depth video, so it's going to be longer than this one, and this one ended up being a little bit longer than I wanted it to be. And like I said, I can go on for a while on this subject. But the next video is going to be in-depth on fear, and the reason why is because, as I stated in my fear and attack proofing video, if you can pinpoint the fear in your life, you can then crush any sin. If you can deal with the fear, if you can go to Jesus and have that fear dealt with, you're going to crush the sin. And even in this video, I demonstrated that people don't want to receive correction because of fear, and there's times people giving bad correction because of fear. Because of selfishness, or they just don't want to give up their information, they're defending their golden calves. It's fear that technically leads us to do the wrong thing. So my next video is going to go in depth regarding fear, examples of fear in the Bible in relation to sin. I'm going to talk about fear of the Lord. I'm going to go into some really, really deep insight on how fear is the root of all sin. And if we can deal with fear, we will be doing really well. We will walk in the right attitude of perfection and in the right attitude of being willing to learn and be like that humble little child. In fact, the fact that I just said that, I'm going to leave you all with this regarding this video. If we want to love truth and if we want to be like the humble little child, we essentially just have to be willing to learn. And if we're willing to learn, we have to be willing to take in new information. We have to be willing to revisit old information. We have to be willing to learn and even relearn. And fear needs to be dealt with if it's stopping us from being willing.